I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
And we are Velocities in Music. On this podcast, Tom and I discuss a shark tank of topics pertaining to modern music, including artist deep dives and monthly and annual new music wrap-ups, and the occasional topic regarding modern music.
Yes.
Before we get started, you can help support Velocities in Music. Subscribe to Velocities in Music on your favorite podcasting device to automatically get our latest podcast episode sent to that device each week. Also, Velocities in Music doesn't want your money. We also don't want to introduce ads into the podcast yet. Right now, all we want is for you to share Velocities in Music with your friends or family whom you think would benefit from joining in on the music discussion Tom and I attempt to create in every episode of Velocities in Music. Tom.
Yes.
We haven't done a topic in a while. We haven't sat and talked. And that's really what Velocities in Music is all about. It's about music, but also talking about music.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you gotta go meta. You gotta bring it up a level, and that's what we gotta do tonight.
Okay.
So it's mid-July, 2016.
Mm-hmm.
Music has thoroughly changed over the course of my lifetime.
Yeah.
From when I was a young lad, my dad. I was raised on two bands: John Cougar Mellencamp and Led Zeppelin. Those are the two bands I was raised on.
That's interesting.
Yep. I don't know what my dad was thinking, but he thought that would be a good idea. And, I'm glad for that. But, I remember like my dad had a record player and he had like a box of records that he had bought with his own money. And he had cassette tapes that he had bought with his own money, and we would listen to the radio and there'd be ads on the radio and things like that.
Yeah.
Somewhere as I grew up, I remember that there was this part of my life, Tom, where I, was starting to get into music. It was right around, like the very late 90s, early 2000s. Like I was in junior high, probably like 12, 13 years old myself.
Sure.
You're a couple years younger than me, so but you had older brothers too who were exposing you to music even before I was getting into music. So at that point in time, it was just like the CD burner was just starting to be something that was a real thing. Napster was out there, so you could for the first time in history download a song from the internet, which 10 years prior to that was just this foreign mind-blowing concept.
And I remember when that first started because it was amazing, but at the same time, man, you really had to work for it though.
Oh yeah.
You remember like the torrent sites and stuff where you would download MP3s from, and I remember our really, really shitty internet, and it would take like 5 hours to download
one song.
Right.
And it was worth
terrible.
it. You'd plan it out. I remember planning these playlists. Like I'd find these songs, hear them on the radio, figure out who they were, and then like write them down. Then go home and plan it out. And I'd collect all these songs and keep them in a folder on my computer, and then assemble this awesome mix CD, right?
Yeah.
Kind of like, how like people before my generation, before our generation, would record songs on the radio onto their cassette tape.
Yep.
Like those. I
remember doing that.
Yeah. Right. So briefly for like 2 years, and then CD burners happened, and that's what we did.
Yep.
But very quickly, we were starting to see, the Internet of Things, internet made everything so much easier. It made everything so much faster. So we just naturally throughout the early 2000s saw the speeding up of music. Music was becoming digital at an uncontrollable rate.
Exponential.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And as that happened, the natural debate was, should we be paying? There was the record industry started to kick back. Tom, one of your favorite bands, kicked hard against
Metallica.
They kicked hard against Napster. And all of a sudden we have this fundamental sea change in how people were viewing music as like a consumer product that you purchased and consumed versus something that was like this experience that you just had a fundamental right to enjoy. Right? As a human being, you just had the right to go out and deal with that. That's a really interesting paradigm shift.
It is.
How, from your perspective and recollection, Tom, how did the world start to deal with that? Like, what were some of the key events that kind of signified this sea change?
Well, it all really was triggered from technological advances. I think that it's just human nature by this point to try to keep pushing and being with the most current technological progressions in our society. So, like we were saying, even when it took hours and hours to download a song, you and I and kids like us at the time, we weren't just twiddling our thumbs saying, no, I want to wait for the technology to get better first. Like, we're not doing that.
No.
We're taking advantage of what we have and trying to push those limits. And the thing is, that creates the almost economical need, that demand for the supply of advanced technology. Mm-hmm. So naturally, people are going to keep developing that. People are going to find new ways to use it, new ways to push it. And I think that we saw that skyrocket, probably between particularly, at least in my recollection, I feel like between 1999 and probably 2005, 2006, it just took off.
So I guess one of the key things that changed in that time period there was the advent of the MP3 player.
Yeah.
We were burning CDs, and I remember the first time I got my first iPod, and iPods weren't the first MP3 player. Several companies had come out with MP3 players at that time, but nothing as revolutionary as the iPod. Nothing as large in capacity, and nothing as easy to use, right?
Sure.
And so the iPod fundamentally changed the way music could be consumed.
Sure.
And while Apple still to this day tries to peddle to actually sell music via the iTunes store,
yeah.
That and now it's Apple Music or whatever,
yeah.
Which I just will formally say I don't subscribe to, but that was, they tried to create this vehicle for music to still be sold, but naturally what everyone did is they took all these audio files that they had downloaded over the years, or CDs or burned CDs that they had ripped from their friends, and then they just threw their files into iTunes and synced them to their iPod. Fundamentally, humans aren't going to waste money on things that they feel aren't a value, right?
Yeah.
That's just the natural human resourcefulness is we're not going to waste precious resources on things that we don't value.
Yeah, if you can get something for free, that's what you're going to opt for.
Right. Unless there's a convenience factor, and the convenience is worth more to you than the time.
But at that point, you're paying for convenience and not the product itself.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's really where the shift happened. But I think that the fact that we were able to consume music more easily, music became much more of a sad to say. I think music has, and still to this day, I mean, even more so to this day, but the advent of the handheld music player became more so than the CD, but where you have maximum capacity of music. I remember wanting a 64 gigabyte iPod to hold all my music.
Max it out.
Right.
Yeah.
So at any point in time I could listen to anything I want. Music became much more disposable.
Sure.
And because of that, because in my mind music was becoming more disposable, my desire and willingness to pay for music went down.
Sure. Now, I think you're hitting on something that I think really comes into this ethical gray area that I think is what enabled this all to happen. And that is that with the digital age of music and the advent of downloads, people in their mind, they're programmed to think of it not as theft, if that makes sense. Because let's take the 1970s. To steal music would be to take a record or a cassette from a music store, and that is the theft of physical property at that point, right? And that's something that mentally, ethically, philosophically, most humans are inclined not to do. But I think that the technological advancement forced us to kind of reconsider and reevaluate where the line was in our ethics. Because then when you could download music, it's, well, I'm getting this for free, and maybe I shouldn't be getting it for free, but I'm not actually taking anything from anyone. Me taking this is not preventing anyone else from having it.
Right.
Because digital data, bytes and information can be duplicated and can be stored in a way that's not, like holding a record or a cassette or a CD. So I think that is a big part of it, because I think that most people would not go break into a music store and steal something. But because they didn't see this as the same thing, it lined up with people's ethics and their morals in a way that enabled them in their mind to justify downloading music, because to them, the impact wasn't as severe. It wasn't necessarily theft in people's minds, even if there is the intellectual property aspect of it. So from there, though, that's kind of mid 2000s. And then in 2007, in October, of course, we experienced with Radiohead's release of In Rainbows. We can't go podcast without talking about Radiohead. It just seems to be...
That's kind of our thing. What we do is...
By this point, yeah.
We're Velocities of Music. We're here to talk about Radiohead.
Right. So they released In Rainbows, and it was the pay what you want model. You could choose to pay nothing. You could choose to empty your bank account into Radiohead's. It really didn't matter. And you still got the music. You still received the product.
What did you pay?
I honestly don't remember.
I remember what I paid.
I want to say I paid maybe like $5.
I paid 20.
You paid 20?
Yeah.
You're a kinder person than I am, apparently.
Well, I figured most people would pay 10. And I was like, I want to pay for 2 people because this is my favorite band.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was like, I'm going to pay for 20.
Yep.
And I was like, student loans, who cares?
So, yeah, right, exactly. Dude, we're
right.
college kids in
right.
2007,
yeah.
so who cared? Right. So the thing is, at that point, when like arguably one of the biggest bands in the world is making their music free on purpose, then it sets a precedent. It sets a standard, and it's hard to go back from that. So I want to
and they weren't the first band to release their music for free.
No.
Other artists had tried this in the past. I don't know if anyone had at such a scale than the pay what you want model.
Yeah.
But Radiohead certainly was the biggest band and
right.
the loudest band about
I don't think that this conversation is necessarily about who did what first. It's about what made the biggest impact.
Sure. Okay.
And I think that arguably Radiohead was up there. It was a big moment.
Yeah.
I remember a lot of articles were being written about that. A lot of folks saying that was the quote unquote death knell for the music industry. Because at that point, if an established artist can give away their music and still survive, and they don't need a record company to do it, then what's the point of a record company?
That's kind of short-sighted.
It was a premature thing to say, because the whole point is that Radiohead was already established band, and they were an established band because of record companies.
Right.
Like that was where, as you said, it becomes short-sighted, because we're in this kind of transitional phase where we have a lot of artists that are still around today that were big in the 90s, 80s, even the 70s, and they see things a certain way. And you have their experience juxtaposed with newer artists, and the struggle is very different for both of those for both of those groups.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, I think this conversation, when you start thinking about music in 2016, which it's been 9 years since In Rainbows came out, which is mind blowing,
crazy. Yeah.
But the thing that I think we have to answer is really, how does music being free impact the artist? And how does music being free impact us as the listener?
Sure.
And Tom, you actually have a very unique perspective, because you have written several of your own albums and released several of your own albums, and correct me if I'm wrong, but all of your albums are available for free.
Yes.
I remember back in like the mid 2000s, like right after Radiohead released In Rainbows, it was like a year, maybe a year and a half later, the bands you were in released an album, and you guys like kind of labored over the decision of whether or not like you should sell this on your website, whether or not you should buy physical copies or just put it up for free. And I remember that what you landed on is you chose to kind of do both. You put it up on your website for free, but you could buy a CD if you wanted. The strategy being that, if as a like unknown, a relatively unknown artist, how do you get your music out there? How do you get over the price barrier? What's the risk that somebody's going to take on an unknown artist?
Sure.
They might hear a song on a radio, and then like, what are they going to do? Are they going to drive to the store and buy your CD or your single from the store? Or are they just, in this day and age, are they just going to Google it and then preview it before they even click download? They're just going to preview it, right? They're going to search YouTube for your song and just listen to like 30 seconds, if even that, just to see if they actually like it, if they liked what they heard, right? Or in this day and age, we have SoundHound now. SoundHound and what's the other one? Shazam?
Yeah.
That you just like SoundHound. Anytime I hear a song that I don't know that I like, I just hit the SoundHound button. It figures out what the song is and then puts it in a playlist in my Spotify. It's the greatest thing ever.
Sure. So you talked about, with my music and when I started releasing my albums, and that actually, it is an interesting story, because my first album came out in 2010. And, I was working on it throughout 2009, and I remember thinking that my plan would be, I'll release maybe my first album or two for free, try to get people listening to it. If I get enough people interested, then maybe I'll start charging a little bit of money for them. Well, by the time I got to like my second or third album, Spotify was a thing, all kinds of streaming services, and I was like, well, screw that. I can't really do that anymore. And that's the thing, is that it's about the precedent being set, because once you go into that realm, once you make something free, it becomes an expectation, and you can't just go back from that. So I'll use a personal story to compare this to. So Jake, you know me for a long time.
This is true.
I've always driven really old beaters for cars, right?
Yeah, this is true.
I've
always been scared for you to drive.
Right. So I had a car from 2011 to 2015. I drove this sucker for a little over 4 years.
Did you name your old beater car?
I did not.
Why not?
I don't know. I just never thought to. I'm not that kind of guy. But this thing was ghetto as hell. I mean, the week after I got it, the muffler fell off in the street while I was driving it home. This thing, the driver's side window, I had to hold up with a piece of wood because the whole door was like taken apart, and it would rain in there and water would collect and rust at the bottom of it.
I gotta be honest with you.
Yeah.
You were kind of a glutton for punishment.
I was too damn proud that I was like, as long as this car freaking runs, I am driving this thing. As long as it gets me where I'm going.
I mean, I think you took some pride in that.
I did.
Yeah,
I did.
Like you were trying to make a point that other people could do what you were doing. They just chose not to.
Right. So do you remember after we stopped commuting to Des Moines together?
Yeah.
I drove that thing to Des Moines an hour each way from my house for work for like 3 months.
Yeah.
And it didn't have any air conditioning. And this was like right at the beginning of the summer. So this is the point I'm getting to, is that once you take a step forward, you can't go back.
I love that you just put that history, that personality quirk of yours out there on the internet.
That's fine. That's fine. So I now have a car, my first car that I've ever owned that has air conditioning. Yes. And I remember when I had my old car, I was like, this isn't that bad. I could, I did this shit for 4 freaking years. And now I have a car with air conditioning. I'm like, I could not live without air conditioning in my car.
You didn't have air conditioning, but you know what you had?
What?
A cassette player and one of those.
Oh, one of those converters?
Yeah.
I could still stream Spotify through my tape deck.
Because welcome to the 2010s.
Right, exactly.
Beater car from the 90s. Can still stream Spotify. No AC. That's not needed.
That's how I roll, man. That's my
Tom Hummer.
Literally.
That is the Tom Hummer I know and love.
Yes. So anyway, I have a car that has air conditioning now, and you can't go back from that. It's a very microcosmic and personal example of, I think, the entire way that society works. The whole point of technological and societal advancement is to raise the quality of living. That's why, in developed countries, we, now believe that things like running water and shelter and food, that these are basic necessities that everyone should have.
They become rights.
And they become rights.
Yeah.
And now you've noticed in the last 5 years or so, it's become the same way with a smartphone. Everyone has a smartphone.
Everyone has one.
And these things, once you go there, they become the standard.
Yeah, the internet is starting to shift to become treated like a public utility.
Right. And now that music is free and consumable without really having to pay for it, I don't think you can go back from that. Mm-hmm. So I think really where we're at now is because of that, there's been a fundamental shift in the way that people regard music, and they don't regard the listening experience as a product anymore. They regard it as advertising.
Is music really free for you and I? I mean, like you and I, we've been saying on Velocities in Music and in this podcast in particular now for quite some time, like we are Spotify buffs. Like we are.
Oh yeah.
That is our primary listening software that we use to listen to music. We don't buy CDs now you collect records.
Yeah, I do.
But we're not going and buying CDs or buying digital downloads here very often. We do occasionally. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, I'd say 98%+ of our music listening is strictly from Spotify.
Oh yeah.
We each pay for a Spotify membership. And so technically we are paying something, but it is a severe fraction of the cost of what we would spend. How many albums do we listen to a month, Tom?
Like 40.
So if we that's how
That's
that's
just
how
new
many
stuff.
that's just new stuff,
Yeah.
right? So say that's all we listen to is just new stuff, and say so 40 new albums a month at $10 an album. We're really going to spend $400 a month, even if we split that between us. That's $200 a month.
Yeah.
When we could just pay $10 a month, $20 a month in total for Spotify.
So this came back to what you said. This comes back in my mind to what you said earlier about what you're actually paying for. We're not paying for the music. We're paying for the convenience.
That's absolutely true.
You can be a Spotify listener. You can stream stuff on YouTube and not have to pay for it. In fact,
what I'm really paying for is the lack of ads.
right.
I want to listen to an album straight through without interruption.
From I became a Spotify user in early 2012. I didn't start paying for it until mid 2014.
I didn't make it that long.
Yeah, you see, because I'm stubborn, as we talked about with my air conditioning. It's the same
The
part
ads
of me.
was the broken air
It's the
conditioner.
same part of
It's
me.
that same-
yes,
yeah.
yes. Well, but actually, I mean, it was the ads, but it was a big part of it was the mobile capabilities because I wanted to listen in my car.
Right.
So at that point, I'm not really paying for the ability to listen to music because I can find other ways.
Right.
I'm paying for the convenience and the access to it whenever I want, and for it to be ad free. So that's really what I'm paying for. Now, a lot of people will think of it as, once again, justified because it's legal. And this level of streaming that we're talking about now is much more legal than the downloads that people were doing in the early 2000s.
sure.
That's absolutely true. I mean, you can't take someone to court for listening to music on Spotify. It's a legitimate business model.
Yeah, because the artist gets a penny for every
Right. I think I've made enough money to maybe buy a burrito off of
Made
Spotify
$5.
I know, which is terrific.
Yeah.
Hey, if it gets me a burrito, right?
You like
But
burritos.
dude, that's the first thing I'd spend it on. That's the thing. So anyway, the thing is, my point is, once you get to that, you can't go back. And the music now, it's your advertising. It's how you promote yourself as an artist, not the end product. It used to be you buy a CD, then that's your product. Your product is your CD. Well, now you put out an album, and it's like, this is my artistic statement. This is why you should be paying attention to me. And now artists have to find other ways to supplement that. And when you're getting a listener interested in your music, it's not just about the music. It's, well, how can I get them to a show? How can I get them to buy a t-shirt? Maybe how can I get them to buy a record? The record, obviously, or a CD or what have you, is still music, but it's not the end product, really. Like it's something you can listen to, but people can listen to it anyway. So like when I buy a record, you mentioned I'm an avid record collector, and I absolutely am. When I buy a record, it's not so that I can have access to the music on it. I am supplementing that experience with something tangible, something physical, because that's worth the money to me. And I think that people more and more are realizing that. I think that people are getting that because more people are buying records and maybe going to concerts. They realize that there's more of an experience to music.
It's almost that as music becomes more digital and more available, more free, in general, people want and crave that tangible experience, and so they're being driven back towards record collecting and record purchases. Just like how I think very recently there were more books like paper book sales, hardcover book sales than actual like ebook sales. And everyone's saying like paper books are back on the rise and everything, but is that really true? I mean, it's probably just like a bump along the road.
Yeah.
But
so is everything, though.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's just interesting because like the argument of should music be free, really, like a lot of people will argue no, it should not be free because the artist made this and it is a craft, it's output, and then the artist deserves something for that, and Spotify that like gives them no money.
Yeah.
But that's not entirely true. I mean, it's based on a contract that Spotify negotiates with that artist record company or agent. And then then that predetermined price based on how many downloads that they or how many streams that they actually obtain is what they get paid. It's just math,
But also it's difficult to really set a standard today because, like I said, there are so many artists who are already established who are taking different stances on this. So let me tell you this with a story. What I mean. So take me for example. I realized at the point that when I was making music, and if I just came to the realization, I was like, if I want people to listen to this, it has to be free, because no one's going to take a gamble on music they don't know when they don't have to.
Right.
When there's something else they could listen to that's free, why are they going to pay for my music? And that's the shift that took place. However, you have bands like, best example out there, I think, is Tool. Tool is not on any streaming services. Hell, they weren't even in the iTunes store. If you want their music, by God, you have to go out and buy a damn CD. But they can get away with it, and whenever their new album is done, I don't know, 10 years from now or whenever that happens to be, if they're still sticking with that,
10,000
years. Right. Then people will still have to go and buy those CDs. And you know what? For Tool, people will. And people did for Taylor Swift when she came out with her album and didn't want it streamed. People did for Adele when she did the same thing. But that is because those artists, you know, while Taylor Swift and Adele are more recent, they're kind of, in kind of a crossover area there. The reason I use the Tool example is because they got big in the early to mid 90s when this wasn't available. They were able to build their fan base in the old school way. And because of that, because they have a loyal fan base, they can continue operating in that way. But new artists can't just jump back into that old model because they would never gain momentum. So they're forced to do things the way that they are today, and it just makes for a whole different environment when it comes to getting known and getting your music acknowledged and listened to.
Why would you put up barriers?
Right.
For potential fans to get to your music?
Mm-hmm.
Why would you put up any barriers? Like at the point that you are at, and the point that many, young up and coming artists are at, like you're fundamentally trying to just get into the ears of any listener you could possibly get to. And whatever opportunity you're going to get for that, you want that to be as quick and easy as possible. You don't want to make it a negative experience, and I feel like any experience associated with a cost is negative.
Yeah.
For the most part, right?
Yeah.
That's not necessarily true in all cases, but for the most part, I'm not going to spend any money.
Yeah.
Any money. In fact, if I even go into a bar where there's live music and I don't know the band, I'm probably not interested in staying at that bar. And that's just because A, I hate going to bars.
Yeah, me too.
And B, live music is, like, from unknown artists, is typically not the best stuff you've ever heard. And to me, it's not worth paying a cover charge for. It's not worth, I want to support local artists, but I want to support them through the ways that I actually enjoy listening to music.
That's fair.
That's just a personal preference. I get that many people want to go and listen to live music and new artists. That's like the thing that they're into. I'm not dissing on that. It's just not something I enjoy because I don't like crowds and I don't like bars.
Yeah.
So to me, I would much rather listen to their music. I would love to listen to their music on Spotify, where I can access it based on the monthly rate that I pay. As a matter of convenience. It's just the way I want to consume it.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I mean, obviously, you're going to go with the option that best suits your personality and your lifestyle. I think that one of the things that the average consumer these days doesn't get, though, is that you get what you pay for. There's a concept, there's an idea in the world of sales that, the price that you put forth for something that you're trying to sell, at that point, right off the bat, you're conveying value to that potential buyer. You're saying, this is what I've got. This is how much it should be worth to you. I will confidently say that this product, whatever I'm trying to sell, doesn't have to be music. This is just a kind of a more global thing.
Yeah, you have to make an assessment of
right.
what the price is.
Right. You make that assessment, and that is what you're putting forth. You're saying to those potential buyers, this is worth this much of your money. Now, what are we doing when we say then that music is free? We're saying that it's not worth anything. That's what we're saying. Now worth is a loaded word there because we're playing with both the monetary definition of it and the intrinsic artistic worth that something can have. But in today's, in this capitalistic society, we really equate the two. Why do you think fine art is so expensive? People will put that value on it, and if it's worth it to someone, they'll pay for it. But it's
also scarcity too, right? Like
that's true.
Like there's only one of those things. I think that what makes music more more just in alignment with just being as free as possible is the fact that it can be distributed for
reproducible.
nothing.
Yeah.
Like the cost of reproduction is zero.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's absolutely true. But thinking of it still from a quality of the art perspective, there's a part of me, there's this kind of like romantic, artsy part of me that thinks that occupations like musician almost should be rewardless just because you should do it for the art.
Yeah.
In the same way that part of me wants to say, like, people who go into professions like being teachers and being doctors shouldn't do it for high pay. They should do it because they want to help people.
Well,
and it's
most of them, teachers anyways, most of them too, because they get paid nothing.
Right, exactly. Well, that's why I use those two as examples, because there's a vast difference in pay grade, and because of that, the reason that people go into those professions. But the thing is, that's really, as I said, romantic and somewhat naive notion, because when you think about it, like I said, you get what you pay for. And if you're not willing to pay the artist that you like for their music, then you can't expect very great music from them. If you pay a band, look at the great bands that were around from the 60s through the 90s. And the reason they were able to do it is because they made a frickin' living off of it, so that they could sit around all day and improve their craft.
Yeah, the other side of this coin though is that, back in like the 70s, there was a relatively fixed number of record companies. It was much harder for you to to write and record an album and then distribute that album. You couldn't just open up your MacBook and do that like you could today. And I feel like today there are many, many, many more record companies and a huge amount more artists creating music on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And quite honestly, a lot of it is crap. If you go out and listen to the music on SoundCloud or Bandcamp or other services like that, like a lot of that music is marginally okay at the best, right? And even Tom, like we go through and preview at least 40 albums a month that we share in our monthly wrap up, and a lot of those we think are passable.
Yeah.
And these are artists that are signed to a record label that have a distribution deal with a company, and we still don't find them to be that intriguing. Just the amount of music that is generated now is so much higher that it's almost, music has diluted itself, and then you compound that issue with just the absolute zero cost of reproducing that music, and it does it have value? I mean, music is music, right? But those artists like a Moonshaped Pool in May when it came out, and the way Radiohead rolled that out, like you had to buy it if you wanted it the day it came out, and I bought it. I didn't think twice about buying it.
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I bought it that day and downloaded it and listened to it right then. And I honestly, I wish more artists did that, because I liked paying for Radiohead. It wasn't even it was a no-brainer to me. I would have paid them more. They charged me what, like $11-12 for that, and I would have easily paid $20-25. Without question, without even thinking about it. If Nine Inch Nails was to come out with an album, if any other of my favorite artists, M. Ward, even M. Ward's last two albums, which have been crappy, but with M. Ward, if M. Ward were to say, I'm only going to release this, I'm going to release it 3 months before it hits anywhere else, before there's CDs available, before it's on Spotify, you can only download it from my website right now, and it's going to cost you $15, I would be like, well, your last two records kind of sucked. Like, I don't really want to risk $15. Even though that's not that much money, I don't want to risk $15 on a crappy record, right?
And more people are starting to do that, though. You don't get releases on Spotify and streaming services right away. Maybe you got to buy it. And I think it's an interesting tactic, and I don't think it takes away too much from being able to stream it later. That way, you're making money off the really devoted fans. But to me, then the question becomes, how do you get to that point? How do you get to the point where you can get away with that and still have people pay for it? It ends up being kind of a vicious cycle. Like, you can't really get big unless you can do that, but you can't really do that unless you're big. So where's the entry point? And that's the point at which I still think record labels are relevant. Well, and that's why we have a lot of smaller ones.
That's true, but I also don't think that musicians get big because of their music. I fundamentally don't. That's one point, but a lot of crappy musicians get big. But it's not because of their music. It's because of other factors, other
Sure.
catalysts that occur at the right time, that get them the right exposure, that just starts the machine up, right? And then it just becomes a snowball effect.
Yeah,
that slowly they grow in popularity, and they either peter out or they become Kanye West.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. There are a lot of variables that go into it, but even in those cases, people still have to like them. Some minimal amount of people have to like them enough to listen to them and keep them afloat and keep the word going. But one way I think this affects the listener and the consumer of music, Jake, is we're not as willing to actually devote time to the music. So I remember back in the day, going to like Hastings and finding like $3 CDs and just taking a gamble on it.
Bjork's Homogenic was that for me.
Really?
Yeah.
And what a great album that was, right?
Album. I still come back to that album.
Did you, I gotta ask, did you love it on first listen?
Oh, hell no.
Exactly. But
Arcade Fire's Funeral was that album. I remember hating that album for like a year. Over a year.
But because you spent money on it, you were stubborn and decided to listen to it enough times.
I never
until
threw
you
it away,
liked
that's for sure.
Right, exactly.
It was always there. It was always in my CD case.
Exactly. And that, I think, is part of the experience that a lot of music listeners don't have today. And I know I'm going to sound like the grumpy old guy that's back in my day and, kids don't get to do what I do or whatever the hell.
You're 27, right?
Yeah. So, but that was one of my favorite parts about being a music fan as a young kid is I'd get a CD for my birthday or something, or, that I never had heard of. But because I had a limited selection of music and I'd already listened the crap out of everything else, I'd spin the hell out of that CD and I'd get to know it. And even if I still ended up not liking it, I learned about it and I learned about myself.
I feel like you just finally explained to me why you like 311.
I love 311. Not ashamed of it. But in all honesty, you're probably right. I mean, I heard them on the radio a lot. I got their CDs. I really got into them.
Sure.
But when
I'm not judging you.
I'm
completely judging you.
No,
but I'm not.
I know. No, that's fine. You've been judging me on that one for years, so I've gotten over it.
I feel like I tried on a couple albums.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. She's just over there laughing. I love it. But there are still some albums even. I mean, I'll tell you this. I had Limp Bizkit's first CD, and no amount of listens made me like that one.
Oh, man.
Even when I was like 10, I did not think that was cool.
Really?
No.
Oh, I did.
See,
I did. I remember playing Pokemon Yellow and listening to
Limp Bizkit. For me, it was their second album. That was I really liked that one. That was my jam when I was in like 5th grade.
Is that the one?
Significant Other?
Oh, yeah, that one was great.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's still a great album.
But I even if
I don't mean that.
If you went back in time and asked 5th grade Tom Hummer, what's the worst CD you own? He would say $3 Bill Y'all by Limp Bizkit. That is crap. Like, even thinking that their second one was cool, I thought that one was crap. So my point is, it forced you to give the music a chance that I think today the average listener does not give.
Yeah.
Because it's a short attention span thing and it's an availability thing. When you have access to other music that in that moment you would rather listen to, then you're going to go for that.
That's a solid point. Honestly, Tom, like the way we do our monthly wrap-ups, I've wondered sometimes, we only listen to that at most one time through, maybe two times through if we love it. But like if we were to really spend the time on every one, say we listen to 40 albums in a month, if we really spent the time to like 5-10 listens on each record, would we find that we fell in love with it?
Yeah, I wonder that all the time.
2012, I remember
keeps me up at night.
Yep, we were reviewing Lost in the Trees, A Church That Fits Our Needs. Mm-hmm. I remember I listened to that thing 5 times in a row one night. Mm-hmm. Trying to figure out, I was like, there's something going on here. I don't really dig this album. And then on the 5th listen, I was like, holy crap, this album is fantastic. And now to this day, it's still one of my favorite albums, probably in my top 10 favorite albums of all time.
Yeah.
We would completely gloss over that right now.
Yeah.
But my point is like the purchase, like the actual physical, tangible purchase of a record, whether that's a CD or a cassette, and back in the day when that was relevant, or a record like it is relevant today, like you're naturally invested in the experience.
Right. Right, and I think there's really something to be said for that. It is a pretty big psychological shift. in the way that people listen to music, and it makes it harder to reach people.
This is actually like a really depressing conversation. Because
Think so?
because I know that I'm missing out on a lot of great music
Yeah.
that I know is probably out there that's just I'm not they're just out of convenience.
Well,
but I can't fight the
there's
convenience.
But there's no magical
going
way.
back.
There's no win-win though, because dude, even back then you'd be missing out on a lot of good music. Would
Because-
we be able to do what we do today and
No,
have been doing for
absolutely
the
not.
last 6 years
No.
if the availability wasn't there?
Yeah.
So there's going to be pros and cons to everything.
Yeah, man, in don't you remember like when like Borders and all those other stores started putting like headphones?
Yeah,
like,
dude.
In
It was
like
awesome.
on the music. So you go in and you stand there and listen at the music rack and then be like, yeah, I heard like a 10-second clip of this song that sounded awesome. I remember doing that with Wilco, and like I was
Yeah.
almost on the fence of buying a Wilco album, and I never did, and I never have liked Wilco. Maybe if I would have just taken the plunge in 2004 or 5 and
I
just
don't know.
bought that Wilco record, I would have been a Wilco fan.
The thing is, it takes a very deliberate like move to actually get into a band for that reason. I have a running list of bands that I've kind of like glossed over, but that I need to come back to because there's a lot of stuff that I am not willing to take my first impression as the law on. I know myself well enough and I've been through enough experiences where I've misjudged something that I know when like, okay, I don't like this, but I need to come back to it. Like I'm
Harvey Milk.
really trying to hone in on that. Yeah, honestly.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff like that out there. So at least people who have that mindset have the opportunity to pursue it that way. There are a lot of bands that I'll start digging into that I'll fall in love with because I take the time and I discipline myself to do that. But I have to question: are really a lot of people doing that?
Yeah.
And who knows? I can't complain that much because honestly, the people who aren't probably aren't the kind of people who would go out and buy CDs or records anyway. So maybe for those people. Maybe it's enough just to have them to give them access to music, and that way it helps them get into it. Maybe they're still listening to music that they wouldn't have otherwise, but then we get into all kinds of speculation. So I think it affects the listener in some odd ways because it's really difficult to gauge.
Yeah,
it's really difficult to predict.
And like I'm not gonna lie, like coming into this conversation, I definitely was of the mindset that music should just be free because how else do you distribute it to the masses in a quick, ineffective manner? And there is some truth still to that in 2016, but like what this is forcing me to do is realizing like I really don't. Like I listen, there's a lot of bands that I love, and those bands, like once they achieve that, like I love this band status, they have to be on my list of like these are bands that I want to see live, and then Ween is a great example of this.
Yeah.
Ween is on my list. I love Ween. Ween is on my list of bands that I want to see live, and hopefully we'll get to see them live later this year.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm willing to spend money on going to have that experience with the band. I used to buy merch. I used to buy T-shirts. I used to buy posters. I ran out of walls to put posters on.
Yeah, I don't buy posters anymore.
Yeah, and then I got married and bought a house and had kids, and then at that point you just don't buy posters anymore. I also don't collect records. It's something that I want to do, but I know my personality, and if I start collecting records, it's gonna be bad.
You'll end up like me.
No, because Mr. Frugal over there, Mr. I have a 2x4 holding up my window. Like I'm not like that.
Yeah,
I will spend a fortune on the records more so than I would because when I want something, I make it happen. Like I go all out, and I know that I'll just run away with records because that tangible experience, music is so personal to me. It's so necessary in my life. And I fundamentally know that, like, I feel like it's part of who I am, that the tangible experience is so valuable that I'll go nuts with it.
And that's what it comes down to really is the individual in my eyes. And what I mean by that is I think that, this conversation, we've kind of framed it as should music be free, but in 2016, that's kind of a moot question.
Yeah,
the fact
that's
is,
a fair point.
it is free. We can argue ethically all day about whether it should or shouldn't be, but the fact is that it is. So from there, it's a question of how does that affect us? What do we do about it? How do we handle it? How does the world move forward? and still have good artists and still have consumers that respect and understand what they're getting. So, to me, what it comes down to is the people who are not going to concerts, who are not buying records or buying CDs or buying merch, who are just taking advantage of this, honestly, they probably wouldn't have bought all those things anyway.
Right.
If they had to, they wouldn't have gone into it. And you know what? If that group of people, probably majority of people, are able to hear something that they wouldn't have heard otherwise and they wouldn't have paid for anyway, then by God, to me, that's worth it.
Right.
To me, that's a sacrifice worth having.
The other side of it is, how many artists have we gotten into because we've listened to their music for nothing?
Yeah.
No cost to us, that we've spent money on, that we go to shows.
Yeah, absolutely.
Andrew Bird, like, I've seen him in concert. I bought a poster.
Yeah.
That's about it. But
still,
but
more
still,
than
like,
a lot of
that's
people
more
would
than
do.
I probably would have never found an Andrew Bird record had I not been able to hear it for free.
Right.
In the first place.
And so
the artist has to create music good enough to earn fans' dollars. You can't just create crap and have a record company distribute it and market it and expect a lot of comeback quality. Expect fans not to, or fans in quotes, listeners to not pirate your music. That's why pirating started, is because music was getting crappy.
Yeah. And really, it's always been that way. You've always had to earn your dollars as a musician. You've had to earn your fans to pay for something, whatever it ends up being.
Yeah, the competition is just so much more fierce now. There's so many more artists.
Sure.
They have so much more technology at their disposal, and an infinite amount of methods in which they can distribute that music. Obviously, primary ones, but like, artists they have to compete with one another, and only the strong will really stand out.
But also, that competition now is not a competition for money. It's a competition for time.
It's a competition for time.
And there's a huge difference there as well. Because, maybe back in 1995, when I was a wee lad and had, my allowance money to buy a CD, then, Stone Temple Pilots was competing with whatever else I was listening to at the time, pick a band. But now
311.
There you go. 311. Those two bands were competing with each other. But right now, are any two bands that are on Spotify or a streaming service really competing with each other? Because really, you can have it all, but you can only listen to so much music in the day. It comes back to a time thing and what is worth my time to listen to. And that way, I almost think it's kind of a good thing, because it's good to only have your competition be what you want to spend your time on. I think it gives people a better chance of discovering new music. It gives artists a better chance of being discovered. But then, coming back to what I was saying about, that group of people who were never going to pay for music, probably still aren't. That's fine. Then I think it comes back to the group, folks like us and anyone bothering to listen to a podcast like this that is probably naturally more enthusiastic about music. And we're looking for ways to supplement that experience. Because for me, like downloading MP3s was fun, burning CDs, whatever, finding ways to feed that music fix, right? And now it's almost like it's gotten so easy that you're finding other ways to get that rush. That's what record shopping is for me.
I'm not going to lie. This conversation has really fundamentally shifted my craving for collecting records.
Really?
Like, I think that I kind of want to start. Like, I've avoided this because I know that once I start, like, it's not something that's ever going to end. I'm just going to keep doing it. But like, the artists that I really care about, like the albums that we've listened to over the past 6 years doing Velocities of Music, like the artists that have earned it, that have released these masterful records, I want to spend money on those bands.
Right. And that's exactly where my head's at. And I think probably a lot of record collectors, because like to me, it's not about why would you do that in 2016 when music's free? Well, yeah, you can listen to it, but is that the whole experience? For me, it's not.
Right.
For me, it's about the thrill of finding something that you really want, that you didn't think you'd ever find, and finding a good value for it, and digging through dusty, moldy bins of records, or maybe brand new ones.
But to me, there's two different types of record shopping. There's the digging through dusty bins trying to find like the value picks and stuff, like, oh, this is a gem and it's kind of beat up, but it's $1, who cares? And then there's probably the route I would take, which is like, I have a list of my favorite albums that I think are perfect.
Yeah.
Have a Nice Life, Have a Nice Life, Lost in the Trees, Kendrick Lamar's To Pimp a Butterfly. Of course, all my favorites like any Radiohead record.
Sure.
9 Inch Nails, A Downward Spiral. These are records that I would want to own, and I honestly would want to buy them probably new.
Yeah.
And have them for posterity's sake. Like the actual album art is art to me.
Yeah.
And I'd like to have a room themed around it with maybe like some framed posters and things. Like that's way like I could see myself going that route.
Yeah. And this comes to the other aspect of it that I was going to get to, and that is honoring the music.
Yes.
Like
honoring the music.
That's the other part of what it's about to me. To me, it's about the thrill of getting out there and actually looking for something physical. And it's about just paying tribute and thanking the people that have impacted your life in such a way. Like for me, there's nothing better that I could be spending my money on. That's what I want to be doing. And the thing is, people like me who share that mindset, that's probably how they would be anyway. Like I don't think it's actually really fundamentally changed the way that people behave. It's just changed availability and accessibility. And the fact is, once I realized that, just streaming music or just having crappy MP3 files, yeah, it's a great convenience, but it doesn't fill that void. It doesn't complete the experience for me, and that's when I started buying records, and I think that's why a lot of people are. But, oh my God, I get so sick of people focusing on it's because it sounds better. Oh, it's stupid to buy records in 2016 when music is free. Like, all of those are missing the point. Like, we have to stop being afraid to just say, you know what? Yeah, streaming music is convenient, but I want something more. I want an experience. I don't just want a product.
Mm-hmm.
I want this to be a lifestyle, because it really is a lifestyle for a lot of people. And that's what it comes down to for me. So I know this seems like it's digressed into kind of a conversation about record collecting, but it goes hand in hand with, paying for music, and that's one of the major options of paying for music today. But really also, I still come back to what I said earlier about, if you want there to be good music, you got to be willing to pay for it, because you do get what you pay for. And the fact is, I think it's tough for people to take the time to make good music today.
In a capitalistic society that is the United States where we live, which is all I know, so I can't speak for other, countries and societies. This like, you really do vote with your dollar.
Mm-hmm.
You make X amount of money per year, and all of the major corporations know on average how much you make a year, right? And what you spend your money on is a vote for what you value and what you think is important. And they like just the way they're trying to win you over to spend money on their products. And music is no different. So if you're voting for music over voting for other things, you're naturally voting for music. So if you're voting for the artist that you like, then hopefully what it means is those artists can grow and prosper, right? That's a very idealistic, but also like that's the way I want to view the world. So I'm going to continue viewing that, however naive that might be.
Well, but really, I come back to the point too of, has it ever really not been that way? I mean, you're going to put your money where your mouth is. You're going to put your money where the value is. Right. The mediums change. But I think that what we're going to see in the future is we're going to see more and more bands doing this thing that, like what Radiohead did, where maybe for the first month or two after something comes out, you got to pay for it. And beyond that, you can stream it. So if you want to, take part in this release experience, actually in that way, what it's really closer to is it's closer to the movie industry.
Yeah. Going
and seeing something in the theater. Are you willing to pay for that? Or will you wait until it's on TV and you don't have to pay for it, or you can go rent it for $1? Like, that's the way movies have always been. So it's more about a timeliness thing. Do you want to pay to take part in that cultural phenomenon that is the new Radiohead album or the new whatever band, or are you willing to wait for it? And I think that a lot of people are going to be willing to pay for that. I think that's a big part of it. I think more and more bands are going to start doing that. But really, I mean, we've already moved in that direction. And I think that where it will really become established is when we get to the point where maybe it'll be, 20 years from now or so, I don't know, where a lot of the bands from decades before who got big in the old way of doing things, when they're not around anymore, and we have a majority of artists who got big in our current age, in our current streaming free music age, I think that's where things will really kind of settle. I just think that these transitional periods last a long time.
Right.
Because artists last a long time. I saw Paul McCartney in concert a couple years ago, for God's sakes. Last weekend, I saw Brian Wilson perform. I mean, these guys from the 60s are still around. These shifts take a long time to happen, and that's why I think there's so much friction right now, is because we have one foot in the future and one foot in the past musically, in terms of who's around, in terms of who's spouting their opinions, in terms of who's making music and who's buying music or listening to music. It's such a hodgepodge and such a clash of demographics and cultures that naturally it's going to produce friction. But I think that in the future things will start to level out, and however it plays out is how it'll play out. But it'll come back to the fact that the people who are willing to pay for music will find a way to do so because that's what they find important. And the people who never did probably still won't.
Well, Tom, this conversation has sprawled from where we first began.
Yeah.
And I feel like we could probably keep talking about this for hours. We could find new alleys to go down. But at some point, like we just have to kind of call it and ask you guys, do you think music should be free? What factors play into the distribution of music and your consumption of music now? What do you pay for? What do you want to pay for, and why? Like I would love to have like a part 2 of this conversation at some point in time, because I think like right now what we're doing is mainly, just two guys having a discussion, speculating about why music is free. But I think that these are important questions, and this question isn't going away.
No.
Right. So I'd like to open up this discussion, get everyone else's opinions, and then maybe we could do a part 2 at some point in time,
that'd be
based on the
interesting.
things that we've kind of learned from igniting this topic, because this is such a potent topic. It's honestly a very polarizing topic as well.
sure.
I mean, I know people personally who like have refused to use Spotify for the reason that they think it rips off artists, right? And that's, I think, a valuable viewpoint, but it's just not one I choose to share. So
Sure.
this is an ongoing debate that I'm very, very curious about. Thank you guys for your continued support and participation. Tom and I love all of your comments and on our YouTube videos, our Facebook messages, and emails. Your participation is what makes Velocities in Music possible, so as always, thank you for being awesome. I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
We are Velocities in Music, moving music discussion forward.